Welcome back to today's video. In today's video, I'm looking at a Biden versus Trump election prediction year from 2024. Looking forward to 2024. As we look at some of these states here, we're going to go ahead and get some of the safe states, some of the lean states, some of the safe and likely states, and then we'll get into some of the more states, looking at polling data and periodic trends. So let's take a look here and give some of the safe states on the extremities of the electoral map. We will give some of the Democratic states to either candidate. Now, this video was actually made out of suggestion from you guys, since I actually put up on my community page what election prediction you guys wanted next, and this is the one that came out on top as being a Trump versus Biden prediction. So that's what came out as being on the top. Now, if you want to influence what type of videos I make for future videos, go over and head to my community page, and all the different polls there for what type of videos you guys want next will be there, and you guys can just vote there, and it'll be very simple. Only about 10 to 15 people vote there, so your vote can really make a big difference in with regards to what videos I make next compared to bigger channels. So that's basically what I wanted to say there. This video was made out of suggestion from some of you guys. So let's take a look here at some of your safe states here. Obviously, we gave several of the states on the extremities to the Democrats, and some of the states on more of the middle area to the Republicans. So let's take a look here at some of your polling data with regards to each of the states. Now, on the general scale here, we have Trump with a majority of the votes with regards to the polls here. Now, ignore some of the more higher polls, because some of these polls are actually different types of scenarios that most likely won't happen in 2024. But these are the actual Biden versus Trump polls. When you look at these polls here, Trump does seem to be having a lead. Now, when you look at a breakdown into these polls, you have Trump at 41% and Biden at 34%. Now, I want to break this down since the polls do not actually add up to 100%. So we want to break it down to some more individual polls. So when we look at this here, Biden is at 34%, Trump at 41%, Kennedy at 21%, Cornel West at 3%. So as you can see, Kennedy is taking a sizable amount of the vote. Now, do I think that Kennedy's actually polling at 21%? Do I think that 21% of Americans are going to vote for RF Kennedy? If you're an RF Kennedy supporter, I'm sorry that I'm about to say this, but no, I don't think that he's going to take 21% of the vote. Why? Because Ross Perot, who was really up in the polls, did not actually win that much percent of the polls. And number two, a lot of Americans will make up their minds with regards to a lesser of two evils scenario, where you have an RFK supporter voting for Biden or an RFK supporter voting for Trump, a Cornel West supporter understanding that Cornel West is probably not going to become president in 2024 if he runs in the Green Party, voting for Biden. So that's where the scenarios kind of lead you to. So we have Trump ahead in the majority of the polls, but you have to remember that independent vote share, which may alter a polling data, which may prove that polling data might be a little bit off with regards to that. Now, Biden does seem to be ahead in some of these other polls. So you see here, Biden is +1, Biden +2, Biden +1. Now, when you look at some of these other polls here at the bottom, Trump does seem to be having a bigger lead than Biden does. Now, some of these polls here, this is DeSantis versus Biden, so we'll try to ignore that. And this poll here, Trump is ahead. So Trump does seem to be out on the general election, but we do not elect presidents on a general scale. We elect presidents on a state-by-state scale. So because of that, let's take a look here at some different state polls. When we look at some of the state polls here in the state of Wisconsin, now Biden does seem to be having a lead here in some of these polls. Now, that being said, Trump does seem to be having a lead in some other polls. Now, you've got to look at previous periodic trends, as I always say in my videos, because taking a look here at a 2022 polling data here, Biden was always ahead of Trump with regards to the polling data. In fact, up until election day and throughout really election season, he was basically. So look at this poll here, right here. You had Biden in an average of some of the polls here. You had Biden +10 over Trump. And even going back here, you had Biden +7. In all these polls, Biden was ahead. When it came down to the actual election, Biden only won the state by around 0.6%, which goes to show something that polls are always not accurate, especially in the state of Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, Biden was really ahead. Although when it actually came down to it, Biden only won the state by around 0.6%. So you got to keep that idea in mind there when you're looking at these polls here. Trump was rarely ahead. And the fact that he's ahead in some of these polls is really telling of really how big his lead may actually be when you look at it in comparison to 2020. Now, that being said, you do have some of these polls here are actually democratically funded. Whenever you have a square there in a standard position that in a blue color, that does mean that it's democratically funded. That being said, Trump does seem to be leading in some of the polls. And the fact that Wisconsin, which is a state which is actually the most conservative in the 2020 election, has a bigger lead for Biden than a state like Pennsylvania. So, example, if I go to Pennsylvania, Trump does seem to be doing better in polling in Pennsylvania. although he seems to be doing worse in polling in Wisconsin, which is really weird, as some of you pointed out in my previous video. Wisconsin is the most conservative of those Rust Belt states, and the fact that polling data shows Biden ahead is really telling of how polling data is conducted in Wisconsin. So because of that, looking at those periodic trends and things like that, I'm going to go ahead and give the state of Wisconsin to Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump should be able to win the state of Wisconsin. Now, as we continue on, let's go ahead and give some of the likely states to either candidate: Indiana, Ohio, and Iowa. These are states I believe that Donald Trump will win, likely. That being said, remember these states were actually not that likely until about 2020, really. Indiana and Iowa, because the fact of the matter was, Trump actually was only able to win these. Trump won these states by around 8 points. But when you look at 2012 and 2008, Barack Obama with Joe Biden as his vice president actually won Iowa and Ohio in 2008 and 2012. So that's an interesting phenomenon to note there. Now, continuing on, Colorado and New Mexico. I'm going to put these states as being likely states for the Dems. The reason why is because Biden won these states by around 10 points in 2020, which is why I'll be putting them as being likely. Now, moving on here, New Hampshire is going to be likely. Biden won this year by around 7 points. He's continually leading in most of the polls. Taking a look here at some other states here, we're going to go ahead and give the state of Alaska as being likely. The reason why I'm giving it as being likely is because Trump won the state by around 10 points in 2020, so I'm going to be going ahead and giving it as being likely. Taking a look here at some more states here. Minnesota is a state which I believe will be tilt for President Biden. I'm not going to look at a lot of the polls because Biden won the state in 2020 by a 7-point margin. And in 2016, Donald Trump actually lost the state by 0.6%, which is really close, but I'm going to go ahead and giving it as being likely for the Democrats. Taking a look here at some more states, Texas and Florida. Texas and Florida, I'm going to be going ahead and giving them as being likely. The reason I'm going to be going ahead and giving them as being likely is the fact that Florida, obviously, at your 2022 election, you had Trump winning it in 2016 and increasing his margin in 2020. Texas obviously was a state which has been reliably Republican. Although that being said, in a more recent election, it has gone being a little bit more Democrat. That being said, Ted Cruz won his re-election in 2018 by a small margin, by the way. But in 2022, the Republicans there in the state of Texas won a race there in 2022 by around 10 points. So I'm going ahead and giving that as being likely for Donald Trump. Um, now that being said, we have to look at some more polls. I'm going to be giving it actually as being lean since Donald Trump only won the state by a bit of a smaller margin. Texas is being lean for the Republicans, and Florida is being more likely because Florida is becoming more towards the right, while Texas is going more towards the left. So it's going to be extremely important noticing how these things are going on in future elections. Taking a look here at Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is going to be important. We already looked at what state of Wisconsin. Let's take a look here at Michigan. Michigan here, you see here, surprisingly, Trump does a little bit better in the state of Michigan than Wisconsin, which is really weird because Michigan, out of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Michigan is more liberal. Okay, Michigan is much more liberal. But the fact that Trump's ahead in these polls, whereas in Wisconsin, which is the most conservative of the four, even the four as a whole, is where Biden's at, is really telling of the polling in the state of Wisconsin. But taking a look here at Michigan. So Michigan here, we do seem to have Trump even here, Trump up 2. You have them even, Trump up 7, and then Biden up 2 and 4. So you guys, as you can see there, the polling is extremely close. Now let's take a look here at some Senate races. Now let's take a look here at some Senate races here as a whole on the election. Now the state of Wisconsin, just going back, Ron Johnson won there. He was ahead in a majority of the polls there by around 3 points there ahead of Barnes. Now in the earlier stages of the race there in August, Barnes was ahead, although when it came down to the election, Johnson did seem to be in the lead. So that was an interesting. We already looked at the state of Wisconsin. We just wanted to point that out. Now in Pennsylvania, we obviously had to look at those polls there. So Pennsylvania, obviously, John Fetterman won, but we're focusing on the state of Michigan. But I just wanted to point out Wisconsin, and I wanted to point out Michigan, but we didn't actually have an election in 2022. So taking a look here, we had Trump up in a majority of these polls. The fact that he's ahead is really telling because you have here in 2020, you had Biden up in a majority of the polls here in 2020. You can see here Biden was up by around 6 points in 2020, although he ended up only winning the state by around 2.4%, whereas in 2024, Trump is ahead in majority of the polls. So because of that, I'm going to go ahead and giving the state of Michigan as being tilt for Donald Trump. Donald Trump should be able to win the state of Michigan tilt. I'm going to go ahead and giving the state of Virginia as being lean. The reason why for Biden is because Biden won this state by a plus 5% margin in 2020 and 2016. Hillary Clinton won that by a 5% margin. Taking a look at some more of these polls here. Pennsylvania, Trump does seem to be in the lead, but Biden does seem to be ahead in some of the polls, although Trump does seem to be in the lead. Now, when you look back at actually 2020, Biden was actually in the lead in majority of the polls. Now, Biden only won this state by 1.2%, although he was ahead in the polls by much larger than 1.2%. He was ahead by around 6 points. Around 6 points. Some of the polls, even up till October, he was ahead by a pretty big margin. So the fact that he was behind by such a big margin, yet he only lost the state by around 1.2%. And now when you look at 2024, Trump is actually beating Biden in a lot of the polls. I'm going to be going ahead and giving the state of Pennsylvania with the Senate race in mind. Now, the Senate race, John Fetterman did win. Now, a lot of people look at the 2022 midterms and they say Republicans can't win in 2024 because of the 2020 midterms. Now, that being said, you have to look at polling in the state of Pennsylvania. In the state of Pennsylvania, for the majority of the race, Fetterman was in the lead for a majority of the race by around 8 points in the race. That being said, it did narrow out as the election day neared in. But basically, Fetterman was in the lead for a majority. Again, I don't like to look at only one poll, but Fetterman was in the lead for a majority of the race there in the state of Pennsylvania. Whereas now, when we look at the state of Pennsylvania for Trump, Trump does seem to be in the lead in the majority of those polls. So I'm going ahead and giving the state of Pennsylvania as being tilt for Donald Trump. Now taking a look here at some more states here. We're going to be going ahead and giving the state of North Carolina. North Carolina here is an extremely important state here. Let's take a look here at where the Senate race is telling us to go here. We're going to be going ahead and giving the state of North Carolina. North Carolina, Ted Budd did win in that state by around 3%. Now, you have to look here at some individual polling data because that is extremely important. When we look at the actual polling data, now, Budd was basically in the lead for a majority of the polls. Now, it did alter a little bit around, although Budd was basically, he had a small deficit in September. Although, as you can see, for a majority of the polls, Budd was in the lead by around the same margin, around 5 points. At the end, he was ahead by around 4 points. So, as you can see there, Budd was in the lead, and he did end up winning by around that same margin. Now, when you look at the state of North Carolina here as of today. So let's take a look here at some polls here from North Carolina. Let me just zoom right into there. So North Carolina, we do see that Trump is in the lead, as was Budd in the state of North Carolina. So as you can see, Budd was in the lead, and he did end up winning in that state there. And we look at the Senate race there. So let me go back. Senate race, Ted Budd did win by around the same margin that he was ahead in the polls. He was ahead in the polls by a larger margin. All that being said, when we look at North Carolina polls, Trump does seem to be in the lead as well. So because of that, also the fact that Republicans have not lost the state since 2008, I'm going ahead and giving that as being tilt for the Republican Party. Moving on here, we're going to go ahead and give the state of Nevada. Now, Nevada is an extremely important state for 2024. Let's take a look here at some of the polling data here from the state of Nevada. You see that Biden is up in a majority of the polls. Trump was ahead for some time, although Biden does seem to be ahead in a majority of those polls. When we look here at the Senate race, again, guys, taking a look here at your crucial Senate races, Masto is ahead here by around 0.8% here in this poll here. Now, when you look at the actual election polls here from this state here, let me go ahead and take a look at here with regards to Nevada. Let me find it really quick. Okay, so Nevada, right? Okay, so Nevada, we do see here that it was extremely important, extremely close race. Now, Cortez was ahead for a majority of the race, although Latex, sorry, I'm not sure if I know how to pronounce her name exactly correct, but the Republicans, they were in the lead there at the very end, although the Democrats were ahead for a majority of the race there. But it was an extremely close race when you look at it, only 0.8%. Although Biden is in the lead, so I'm going to go ahead and give it to Biden. You have to look at both characteristics in mind there, but Biden is going to be having a pretty good lead there. It has not voted Republican since 2004, so it would not be a very good idea for me to give them to the Dems, to the Republicans rather. So you can look here at Arizona, taking a look here. Before we go to Arizona, let's take a look at Georgia. Georgia here, we do see that Trump is seemed to be being in the lead for a majority of these polls here. Now, when we take a look here, Trump, as you can see, he is ahead by around 5, 3, 9 points, 4 points. Biden's ahead by 2 points. This is a DeSantis poll, so we'll try to ignore that for now. But taking a look at Georgia, we did have the runoff race here. The runoff race happened after the actual election in which the two top candidates actually duked it out. So Ralph Warnock, who was the Democrat incumbent, did win by around 2 points. So that's an interesting thing to note there. Now, that being said, let's take a look at some of the polling in Georgia ahead of the election. As you can see here, some December polling. Now, obviously, the election obviously happened in December. It was the runoff race after the actual election. So you had Warnock ahead, and Warnock did end up winning by around the same margin that he was ahead. But when you look at the polls here in Georgia, Trump does seem to be in the lead. So because of that, you can see how that's different, how the Democrats were ahead in the Senate, and they ended up winning by around that same margin. Whereas in Georgia, in the state of Georgia, you had Warnock, you had Warnock ahead throughout the entire race, whereas Trump, he's ahead in majority of the polls. So because of that, you can see how I would give that to Trump over Biden there because of the fact that he's ahead in the polls. Again, a lot of people point to the 2022 midterms. Although that being said, you have to look at polling data before the election in 2022 midterms and compare to polling data before the 2024 election. Obviously, we don't have results of the 2024 election yet, but we can. That's what we're predicting, right? So taking a look here, we're going to go ahead and give our next state here, the state of Arizona. Now, Arizona, Trump does seem to be ahead also in the state of Arizona. He's ahead by 4 points, 5 points, 5 points, 1 point, and then 2 points. We have them even, and then Trump up 4 points. So he is ahead in that state. Taking a look here at the Senate race here, let me go back to our U.S. map. Arizona, you had Mark Kelly winning. Now we look at the polling data in the state of Arizona right before the election. Kelly was in the lead for a majority of the race. In fact, it closed up near the end, which is really weird how races really close up at the very end, really narrow in at the very end, which creates a lot of suspense for the election. Although Kelly was in the lead. Taking a look here, this is like October. You had Kelly in the lead in basically a majority of the polls, and he ended up winning in the race, correct? All of that being said, when we look at Trump here, he is ahead in the majority of the polls, whereas the Democrats were ahead in that poll. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and give Arizona as being tilt for the Republicans. We're going to be going ahead and giving one of Nevada's congressional district as being tilt. The reason why is because of the Omaha regions, and then one of the congressional districts in the state of Maine as being likely, since Donald Trump won that in 2016 and 2020, and a kind of conservative area. So that being said, with all of this information intact, we have Trump at 306 electoral votes, which is really weird because I was not actually planning this, guys, but this was actually the exact same margin that Trump won the 2016 election and Biden won the 2020 election. So that would be really weird. If we were to get this scenario to come out, that would probably be the first election in a very long time that the winner had exactly 306 electoral votes in 3 consecutive presidential elections. But anyways, that's not important, really. This is my prediction, guys. A lot of you guys might disagree with this, but I'm trying to base everything off of polling in states like Nevada, Georgia, Arizona. We're looking at the Senate races, obviously, as a whole, correct? And looking at the Georgia runoff races. So everything, I'm putting them all together. I'm looking at the data before the 2022 midterms and predicting it on from there. One of the person who commented in one of my last videos said, "What about the 2022 election?" Well, when we look at the 2022 election, candidates in states like North Carolina, where let me go back to North Carolina. So North Carolina, let me just go ahead really quickly. North Carolina, let me find that. Okay, so North Carolina should be okay. So here, North Carolina. So in candidates like in states like North Carolina, where the Republicans were basically in the lead for a majority of the race, ended up actually winning when we look at states in North Carolina. Whereas in states, for example, like Arizona or states like Wisconsin, let me find a state here, Nevada, where Democrats were ahead of majority of the race, Democrats ended up actually winning when you look at the election here with regards to the race. So that kind of gives you a general outlook with regards to the race. I'm putting everything together, guys. If you like this video, guys, please hit the subscribe button, guys. Again, only around 1% of my viewers who watch this channel actually subscribe. So do me a quick favor, guys, and subscribe and like, because this channel is just growing. Help the algorithm. I'll see you guys in the next video where we talk about more elections. I'll see you guys in the next video.